I've been paying a lot of attention to this notion of censorship that has been taking place, whether that's with the Hunter Biden stuff from the standpoint of the New York Post, where they basically said, you can't air this. They even shut down the New York Post account. Lo and behold, that story ended up being right. You had all of these places that derided it as Russian disinformation and everything else. No, the story was correct. And when you think about it, they basically gave cover to a story that was true that might have negatively impacted one of the political candidates that was running. And the reason that they did that was for that explicit reason, on some level influencing potentially the race. They remember what happened with Hillary Clinton. They were saying that's not going to happen again, and they made a concerted effort to not allow that to happen again. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. Whether it was going to hurt Joe Biden, infinitely important. And you are seeing this now. I mean, with many of the stories they're putting out, it doesn't necessarily seem that they care all that much about whether the story is true. Um, so you have Donald Trump banned from Facebook. Well, banned from Twitter indefinitely, permanently, apparently, but banned from Facebook. And Facebook bans him because of what took place on January 6th. Meaning Donald Trump saying, you're great people, I love you, etc., 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 while these guys were beating up cops and raiding the Capitol. Well, and looking for people with cords and whatnot as if they were going to hang people on the Capitol lawn. And Donald Trump basically egging these guys on. So Facebook say you violated our rules and banned him indefinitely. Now, Facebook then kicked this to some kind of quasi independent body. And that quasi independent body basically comes up, it's like a court with an evaluation of whether or not Facebook did the right thing. Well, Donald Trump is going to remain banned. But the court did say, well, I mean, you guys can't just give an indefinite suspension. You guys need to reconsider um, how long he's going to be suspended and whether or not the risk still exists than Donald Trump. Meaning this happened when there was this kind of raid on the Capitol. Has there been another raid on the Capitol? Is there a concern that Donald Trump is going to egg on another raid on the Capitol or pose some kind of danger or pose some kind of threat? By the same token, they did say that the ban was correct and that this was a move that was necessary because of everything that was taking place, and there needed to be a clear transition of power without further attacks on the system. When you think about it, what you're basically getting is that mainstream media is basically state media. These guys work in concert with whatever state puts out. If they put out leads, because if you think about it from their perspective for the moment, you may have intelligence that has people that are working with the media. Media, from its standpoint, believes I am nurturing a source. I have a source. That guy's my source. That intelligent guy is my source. And that intelligent guy is my source. And that intelligent guy is my source. I have all of these sources. These guys are looking at them as they're my gateway to getting what I want out into the public. For whatever particular reason, I want it out into the public. Now, I don't know if it's as organized as all of these guys are thinking behind the scenes or where they want to push and there's an intelligence point of view. I don't know if it's like that. But I suspect that they have a similar mindset in regards to intelligence. And in some of the stuff that they leak, it just so happens to end up going in a particular direction, especially when it was going against Trump. And so the media is like, they're my source. These guys are like, they're my conduit for stories to go out. And they put out stories. And the media person says, yes, I just got a leak. And they put that leak out uncritically. Why would they criticize a story that they are putting out? Especially if the story gets them eyes or clicks or views or somebody talking about it or their editor or whoever else applauds them and says, good job. And what they all know is that when that story is proven wrong, they just move on. No point in looking back. No point in criticizing their error or their failure. No point in criticizing how ludicrous the story might have been or anything like that. They just move forward. That's what they did with the whole Russians are paying the Taliban. I go back to that because that's so fucking ludicrous. Why would Russia have to pay the Taliban to do what the Taliban had been doing for decades? And not just doing for decades, doing because they're in their country, meaning the story doesn't necessarily make sense. And what happened? When the media was told that story is not true, or that was a very low level of intel, they said, okay, story away. And then they jump to the next conspiracy theory and they just run with it. And at no point do they look back and say, how much of this did we get wrong? And in going forward, how do we ensure that we get it more right instead of wrong in the way that we were getting it? No, that analysis doesn't take place. Nobody cares. They put out stories that go in a particular direction. And then there's this weird news bubble that takes place from the standpoint of the White House news, the questions that you can ask. There's a weird thing that takes place in regards to barriers around the thought that happens in Washington and the press. It's very strange. It's an American point of view. But it's an American point of view that's jaded as all hell and is not in line with reality at all in the way that they talk about reality. They would say, for example, hey, Iran is not coming back to the deal. Well, how are you going to get Iran to come back to the deal? And it's like, well, wait, no. It's the United States that yanked and pulled itself out of the deal. Iran stayed with the deal for a year after, not us. Your question is not, when will Iran come back to the deal? Your question is, when will you go back to the deal? In which Iran says you get rid of the sanctions. Well, when will you get rid of the sanctions, go back to the deal? That's the question. But it doesn't even process in their heads to ask the question in those terms. They would say, hey, all of these immigrants are at our border. What the hell is Joe Biden going to do about those immigrants? They keep coming to this country. Now, no one asks the question. It doesn't even apply or occur to them to say, hey, is it possible that the coups that we have been engaged in South America for all of those years, as recently as Honduras, as recently as Bolivia, at the very least there's some implication, that those coups have not been to the betterment of those countries. And as such, we've created somewhat basket cases based on a foreign policy, even from the standpoint of the drug policy or from the standpoint of the drugs that the United States and Americans consume. Isn't it an answer more than just, natural disasters? It is man-made disasters in regards to foreign policy. That doesn't apply. You can't ask that question. That question doesn't even process. All of the stuff is talked about from the standpoint of American triumphalism, exceptional. And so anything that makes that less exceptional doesn't entirely apply. It is a very, very weird logic. And yet, it is the way they do politics. Imagine for the moment that you can never challenge that. Meaning, imagine for the moment if the very challenge of that mindset is considered outside the realm of conversation. This is not something that we want to have. And social media takes the perspective that we need the cat videos of news. And so they go to corporate media and they say, okay, well, we're going to also put on corporate media. And so YouTube, this thing that started out with you as individuals giving up your information and everything else and just shaking, rattling, doing your cat videos and the works, or coming on to doing the news, that gets sublimated into cat videos of news. And you get pushed to the bowels of the nether regions based on the algorithmic organization of the system itself. Because what you're saying is not in line with the cat videos of corporate news. You're risky, you're edgy, you're borderline. And we have a hard time getting money on the borderline content. And not just borderline content or the hard time getting the money, we have to put extra resources to look at it. I mean, You guys are asking us to do extra work. I mean, and for God's sake. And so, yes, we're a profit-making enterprise. And as such, what we're going to do is we're going to prioritize the videos that can make us the most profit. Now, if somebody looks for you, it will be there. And if somebody is subscribed to you, nominally, more or less, it'll be there until we pretty much eliminate you from their page. But they'll be there mostly. But for the most part, we're going to stay away with the edgy stuff. We're going to go just to the cat videos. So people who criticize the system itself, and hell, you may even get to the point where the criticism of the system itself becomes unwarranted or not necessarily allowed, especially when you get around the elections. This is dangerous. I consider this very problematic. The President of the United States is apparently too edgy for the American public to deal with, despite the fact that he was literally in power for 4 years. What do you think Donald Trump is going to do out of power that he didn't do while he was in power and on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram? I get you want to think that Donald Trump is a maniac, fair enough. But Donald Trump literally had fingers on nuclear button, those chubby little fingers. And also on Twitter. Chubby little fingers typing away on Twitter, 2 in the morning, just raging out. Man, screaming into the electronic void. What do you think he's going to do on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram now that he did not do, or that is going to be of greater value and greater intensity and greater potential to destroy and crack the world that he couldn't do when he was president of the United States? That's what I don't understand. Now, the Oversight Board is making the point of saying, yes, you should reconsider and everything else. I am further to something on this, but they shouldn't have never got rid of him in the first place. And that same thing goes for Twitter. There needs to be another way of dealing with this other than that. And I get it. You could say Twitter and Facebook and these things are private companies. By the same token, are they billboards or are they publishers? And some of the decisions, they look like they are publishers. Now, I get that people want to say Donald Trump was causing harm. Fair enough, Donald Trump was causing harm. But do you really want to get rid of him? And do you really want this modus operandi where the only thing, or the thing that gets the highest value, is just a standard opinion, a standard idea? This notion of creating additional robots, like if you were pushing people back to the 50s and the 60s. Well, in this particular situation with the internet, that's not necessarily the way these channels were built. And from the standpoint of YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or social media, it's social media. It's people talking about, criticizing, engaging in dialogue about. Yes, you would have some nutcases. By the same token, you would have some people that are actually making a hell of a lot of sense that you don't necessarily want to engage and deal with because it's against certain political persuasions. Yes, that's social media. That's human beings. That's what we are. We've gotten to the point where these places have become our commons, where you have so many people in a society, or for that matter, in the world, that we've been webbed together with technology in a way that we can never be webbed together as human beings. As human beings, we only have the faculty to deal with a certain amount of other human beings at any particular time. But what happens when you have technology that magnifies you, your voice, what you think about, what you talk about, among people who are all over the world, not just to where you are? Well, for one thing, when something happens in one place over the world, it immediately happens everywhere else because the technology basically has a video camera on it and shows it everywhere else. So the suffering or challenge or difficulty of people elsewhere immediately becomes our own. There's no way to disassociate yourself from it. And from a human terms, because you can see it. There's no way to say, okay, well, what happens in this kind of other country? Well, you know what happens because you can see it. Information is available at a moment's touch, at a fingertip. And that's for basically pretty much all over the world. Technology has basically webbed your country, your world, together. So the thing or the medium that's allowing that are tech companies. And the problem, on some level, is that we have private enterprise. And the private enterprise is doing something. But the reason it's doing it is for profit. It's not necessarily doing it for world good or for societal good. And so that need for profit is put up against societal good. And society says, well, wait a minute, I want to be able to have my say. And the company says, well, I need to make my profits. Now, the catch is, if there was something that was this kind of public mediation of us and the way that we engage with one another, then free speech at that point will be the main law. But these are not free speech companies. And so you get into this weird mix where these companies have the power to basically snap their fingers and the president of the United States goes up in smoke, vanishes. Like he was never there. In fact, they could put through a sequel thing to erase everything that he ever put out on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Delete star from this particular table where name equals Trump or where ID equals whatever Trump's ID is. I'm making the point that this is problematic. And this is not something to cheer. That Facebook's not going to open it up. And I think it's not something to cheer because I don't necessarily think this indoctrination of corporate media, again, who often gets it wrong, who has barriers in regards to the way that it thinks and the things that it says, and who are clearly politically motivated and even motivated on some level by the agents that give them these various things to put into the public's thought process. So, no, I don't think a small body of human beings should have the ability to silence pretty much anybody in a society for whatever particular reason that goes on. And I get some of that stuff gets risque. And if it's, one of those situations where there is a clear and present danger and, it's like, okay, Ted is going to murder Bob. Yes, I don't want that on there. Fair enough. And, there may be other means that one could find to try to mitigate some of the damage from some of the things that come up. But what I don't want is one or all of these people to move elsewhere. And as they move elsewhere, there's just this little website that all of them are on, all of them are crew to, all of them talk, all of them have the exact same. I don't want that. I mean, for some level, we're human beings. We need to be able to interact with one another. And that interaction with one another is, believe it or not, despite the friction that's involved, one of the things that allow certain people to change, to get a different point of view. And sometimes having a friend that has that particular different point of view or being able to see that point of view either online or something to that effect does have impact. I don't necessarily want people into balkanized areas. And I know a lot of news has become that way. But social media was something else. And at this point, they have now basically made it corporate media light. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.